How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to another episode of Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask that titular question. Because when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane?
So whether you're a volcano or a wild storm, get ready to increase the value of your bullet, because this week we're diving into the semi-historical blockbuster Tollywood epic, SS Rajamouli's RRR 2022.
Woo-woo.
Did I say the last name right? I meant to check before the episode, and I didn't.
That's how everybody was saying it in the documentary.
Rajamouli? Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Good for me.
Good for you.
Less good for me. Why did Parker make me say, get ready to increase the value of your bullet? Why did he?
I did no such thing.
It's weird that Parker made me say that. That was really weird.
I don't like the way you're portraying me.
I'm not doing anything.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. Welcome back.
Glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Parker, this is a movie that you picked.
I did.
This is your first pick of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Because I picked Mank. Womp
Yes.
womp.
Womp womp.
I think I know why you picked this, but why don't you tell everyone else why you picked RRR? And also, maybe for those who don't know, what is RRR?
Okay, yeah. So, for those that don't know, RRR is a 2022 Indian Telugu language epic, directed by SS Rajamouli. And the thing that is one of the things that's very interesting and funny about this movie is that when this movie was announced, it was announced with Rajamouli attached, as well as the two stars. NTR Jr., as he is known within the industry, as well as Ram Karan. And this was a huge deal. These are huge stars and a huge director within Indian cinema. And so when the project was announced, people online were talking about it with hashtag RRR movie, standing for the initials of these three kind of creative forces involved with the picture. That became so wildly popular that they never changed the title. They just kept that, and then they adapted it. They made it Rise, Roar, Revolt as the acronym, but it is just referencing the director and the two stars, which my comparison point for people when I talk about this is imagine if The Post was just like SHS for Spielberg, Hanks, Streep.
Yeah.
You know? Like that's the level we're operating at.
Sure.
And
The Post, a famous American action film,
absolutely
that drew audiences in like nothing else before.
Yeah, people were in the aisles of the movie theater losing their mind for The Post. I wanted to bring this on the show because you and I talk about, both on the podcast and in our private lives, a general disillusionment in the widening of the gap between kind of artistically interesting indie cinema and usually very like corporatized blockbusters that we deal with that just get further and further from being anything of interest most of the time. And that just keeps getting worse. And RRR for me represents within the past few years, like one of the big action movie spectacles that I've experienced and other people around me have experienced that feel like how it must have felt to watch Star Wars in theaters for the first time and just lose your mind over this thing, you know?
Yeah.
Like I've yet to see, I've watched this movie 8 times now. This is my 8th watch since this movie came out. And each time I have tried to make sure that at least one person who hadn't seen it was there to watch it with me, because I am addicted to watching people watch this for the first time, because nobody's silent about it. Like nobody just takes this movie in and just, yes. Like there is audible gasps, there's cheers, there's hollers. And this is universal across the board of you and I and a group of friends that got to see it in theaters in
It's
Salt
true.
Lake, which
It's
was
true.
a very fun experience. And additionally, I've shown this at my house to a lot of friends. And even watching it at home, you're still getting those kinds of reactions from people, which I just think is really exciting. So I wanted to bring this on because it's a movie that I enjoy a lot and one that I think is, and even more so now that I've watched like the making of documentary, is just a real testament to filmmaking. And like it's just there are so many films that I know of that like could be equally as good in other formats, right? Could make an excellent novel, would make a great stage play, and you wouldn't lose a lot in translation. RRR has to be a movie. Like it is a movie in, capital M ways for me. And I just really love that. And I was interested to bring it in conversation with, quote unquote, the greatest film of all time, as we've talked about.
Perhaps, what do you think about this? This is perhaps one of the least Kane-like movies we've brought to the show.
Very much so.
Would you say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just something I was thinking about.
It's interesting because I wouldn't describe it as being like in direct opposition to Kane. It's not a combative movie to Kane or what Kane's trying to do, but it is, if you have a spectrum of cinematic storytelling, it is on the far extreme side of, like you said, very unlike Kane in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Just completely different culturally, temporally, as far as when it was made, where it was made, what it's doing. Yeah. Parker, I want to talk about, this is a movie that we both seen, but more importantly, we saw it for the first time together. We watched it at your house.
Yeah.
And I have seen this half the times that you have. I think I've seen this 4 times. First time was with you, second time was with you, third time was with you. This was my first time watching it without you.
Wow.
And it was wonderful.
I'll bet it was. I find that most cinema is enriched when you are freed of my shackles.
No, Parker, no. Oh, it's not funny when you do it.
Whoops. Sorry, folks.
But no, you're fine. But like I really, I don't know, like one of my favorite movie watching experiences was seeing this for the first time at your house. Let it be known, I brought the movie. I was like, we should watch this movie, even though you had also seen a clip of the movie.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that? I'm pretty sure I know what clip it was, but do you want to talk about like your first glimpse of this movie? Because it was the summer of 2022, just for context, summer of 2022. This had come out in India and was doing really well over there. And it started to bleed over into certain people in America were seeing it. And people were kind of just barely starting to talk about specifically like the first two of the first 3 scenes in the movie.
Yeah.
I would say. And you saw one of those first, right?
If memory serves, I think it was Bheem's introduction. I think is the shot over the water that then does the 180 flip. And people on film Twitter were be like, what the hell is this? Like, whoa.
Right. Yeah. So it was on the precipice of kind of reaching more people over here.
Yeah.
And I had also heard about it. And so we were like, oh, we've got to watch this. But I don't think either of us were prepared for the journey of it that first time.
Not at all.
And I'm sure we'll kind of talk about that as we unfold the summary of the film.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, what have you learned over your 8 watches, Parker? I mean, I know this, you said earlier this is a movie you enjoy. I mean, it just entered your top 4 favorites, right?
It did. It was that I was watching it this last time, and about halfway through, I was just like, yeah, this does it for me. Like, this is such like everything I want out of a movie. And the 8 watches has been really good for me because it's given me time, and we're going to talk about this later, I'm sure. It's given me time to look into the cultural contexts of this movie, both positive and negative, and
which is something
the praise and the criticism.
Yeah, something I do want to bring to this. I didn't want to be a party pooper and bring that.
No.
So I'm glad like, that we'll be talking about it in context.
The way I will preface it is that like this movie is a top 4 movie for me now and is a 5-star movie for me, that I think there are things to talk about around the movie, you know?
Yeah.
But I keep finding, you and I were texting about this a little bit as we were both doing our watches, just like an hour out of sync with each other. I think I started just a little earlier than you did, but we were texting each other about the movie. And just a conversation we were having that I was thinking about actively, and I think about every time I watch this movie, is just it leans into its own sincerity so much. It is so entirely earnest that it's kind of infallible within that, right? Like if somebody buys into what they're doing enough, then yeah, it's like, yeah, you're achieving exactly what you're trying to achieve, right? Like this movie, more than maybe any other I've seen in a while, knows exactly what it is and doesn't try to be anything that it isn't, right? Like it has no preconceptions of trying to be anything like Kane or any other movie like that, you know? Like there's I don't think that was at all on the mind. Whereas even Western movies that are very much not trying to be anything like that. I can't remember. I should have tracked down this clip at some point. I will see if I can find it. But I remember seeing was it Endgame? It was one of the Avengers movies. Some BTS clip of the actors talking about it, and like I can't remember if it was Robert Downey Jr. or somebody else. Somebody mentions Kane. Somebody talks about, they're like, you know, there's interesting layers. Like it's almost like, you know, Citizen Kane or something. Like they toss that around. So even movies that within like our American Western culture have nothing to do with that kind of like highbrow artsy filmmaking are still thinking about and in conversation with it. And RRR just isn't interested at all. Like it's just like, no, why on earth would we?
There is a self-consciousness to the American blockbuster that I think there's these, you know, it's either an American blockbuster where people are involved in it are trying to rationalize their involvement and are therefore putting more onto it than is there. You know, that's where I think the Kane, you know, references come in for like movies like that, where it's like, no, you don't need to say that. But I wonder if some performers and some crew on these movies need to validate it, to be like, no, it's trying to do something better. Right. And then you have like other people who are like, excuse American blockbusters by being like, well, you just turn off your brain. It's just a turn off your brain movie.
Sure.
And I think something that RRR has and is a combination of earnestness and adrenaline, where I think that, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on this as someone who has made an effort to show this to someone new every time. Have you run into anyone who reacts to this movie the way that people react to similar action in American films or even in other Indian films? You know, clips will go viral on social media of like, this movie looks nuts. And it's like a guy in a Bollywood film or a Tollywood film or what have you, you know, beating up rockets and such. And like, there's a level of like scoffing at silliness that Americans really like to do at action movies from other things. And I'm curious if you've seen that at all in showing this to new people. I mean, maybe you just know people who wouldn't have this reaction, but have you seen anyone try to slot this into that category of, oh yeah, that movie's just silly like that? My ultimate point being, RRR has all the traits of what we would call in America turn off your brain action.
Totally.
But I think what it doesn't have is turn off your heart action. I think that a lot of the turn off your brain movies we make over here also ask you to turn off your heart, in the sense that they have not a lot of sincerity. The primary goal is cool guys doing action things.
Spectacle. Yeah.
It's spectacle. And RRR has spectacle, but it is intrinsically tied to the massive beating heart of the movie and the like emotion and themes of the movie that are just so big and bombastic. Like the emotion in this movie is bombastic. And I don't think Americans make emotional blockbusters not nearly as much, right?
No, like not in the slightest. Like it's interesting that you bring that up because did you have anything else there? I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off.
I mean, I had a question that I asked and then buried it, but
Well, I'll get to your question first, which
okay.
is that surprisingly, no. I've shown this to people who, as persons, I've noticed that like they're the kind of people to be a little bit more skeptical, a little bit more, uh contrarian in some ways or another. And it's been interesting watching those people watch it because I get a sense in the first like 30 minutes, there's a bit of friction for them. And then it never happens at the same spot, but there is a moment for all of them where they buy into it.
Right.
And those people, like the 2 or 3 that I'm thinking of, have all given this movie 5 stars. Like loved this movie by the end of it. And those were the people going in that I was like, I don't really know if it's for them. Like we'll see. And it does inevitably win them over, which is very interesting.
I really like that of like buying in. I think that's a good point. But you had something else you were going to say as well.
I was just like, you were just talking about like big blockbuster Hollywood movies don't usually have big emotionality behind them. And like genuinely, and it's not even quite to the same level, but like honestly, one of the most recent examples come to mind, and I say recent, in context of all this, but like 97's Titanic might be the only other like American-made Hollywood movie that I feel like tries to get the emotions to match the spectacle. Like it is such a melodrama in the way that people are performing and acting in that movie to match this huge scale of the shipwreck and everything going on around them.
Sure.
Doesn't work for me personally, but like I think that's really the only Hollywood example that springs to mind. I'm sure there are others, but like it is very few and far between, to your point.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the only other thing I can think of as far as big emotions in blockbuster filmmaking has come as a result of legacy sequels.
Sure.
But those aren't asking you to like the emotions. This is kind of an interesting point. And then we'll get to RRR, I'm sure, which is a 3-hour movie, but I think we'll fly through it. But like looking at the Star Wars sequel trilogy, for example, that is a movie that asks you to feel emotions about its characters. However, I would argue that the emotions are entirely metatextual. The big bombastic emotions behind the Star Wars sequels and a lot of legacy sequels rely on you having a pre-existing connection to the characters and are using your emotions to connect with the film. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Because I agree with you. I think that the 90s was the last time that we were really making these massive emotional blockbusters or just rather emotional movies that were blockbusters.
Yeah.
Right. But like action starting in the 2000s and that kind of thing, like Spielberg used to play with these emotions a lot.
Totally. Mm-hmm.
But as he entered, the latter half of his career, that kind of went away in favor of smaller movies that still ask you to feel those things, but they're not like these big adventure action movies, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, like I just feel like the emotions that people are asked to feel now oftentimes are required, like there's required reading to really connect emotionally with blockbusters now, right?
Yeah, you have to have homework. It's all intertextuality.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about Lord of the Rings as a candidate?
I was thinking about Lord of the Rings,
but that's not about the emotions of it.
No, and when it is, like, it's still like there is a very different kind of specifically like masculine love presented in Lord of the Rings that is not, it is so much quieter, right? Like it's not like the moment of Aragorn having a saying goodbye to Frodo is not clasping hands like I would have gone with you to the very fires. Like it's not that. It's so much quieter. It is so much more intimate, which I think that it is operating on a level of like emotional sincerity that does exist here, but the bombast is missing. It is much more.
That's a good point.
Naturalistic, I guess. I like
your distinction between emotional sincerity and emotional bombast.
Yeah.
Both of which I think are severely lacking from American blockbuster filmmaking, which is to say, back to RRR, this movie has emotional sincerity and emotional bombast out the wazoo. Like this is a movie that predicates itself upon bombastic emotional sincerity. And I think a lot of people in America and around the world, but from what, we're Americans, we primarily engaged with this through American film culture.
Yeah.
A lot of people were so thrilled by this because it's something that we don't get and we don't have.
Totally. And I was watching the behind the scenes, and it was really interesting hearing the director talk about this. Like Rajamouli was saying that an approach he brought to the direction of this film and the writing of it is that he says, this is an action movie, like a capital A action movie. He's like, and everything else that isn't action should still feel like action. Emotionality should feel like action. Dance should feel like action. Sorrow and grief should feel like action. And it has that level of octane to everything.
That's interesting. It's almost like the musical approach of when emotions get too strong, you burst into song. But in this movie, it's when emotions get too strong, you burst into action.
You burst into action.
And that depends on the environment you're in. For example, there is a fantastic dance number in this movie, but it is that's an interesting approach. I like that. That's very interesting.
Yeah. I just thought it was a very interesting way of approaching a movie like this that I enjoyed quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, great. So that's the episode, or should we?
Let's wrap it up. So a bit of table setting that I want to do before we get into the summary, which is like, it's really just kind of one piece, and the rest of it we could sprinkle throughout. But I just thought this was very interesting that the film was co-written between Rajamouli and his fellow screenwriter. I'm so sorry, I'm going to butcher this name. Vajendra Prasada, I think, something along those lines. But he in the documentary, he talks about how the impetus of this idea is that this is, like you said in the intro, semi-historical. These are two historical figures, two revolutionaries within the history of India, who he's talking about it in the interview, and he's like, yeah, so both of these guys were born around the same time and existed in somewhat of the same areas. This is, and in both of their histories, they both disappeared for a number of years in the same time frame. And so this movie is just, what if in that time that we can't account for them, they met up and they became best friends?
What this film presupposes is,
what if they were friends? What if they were friends? Which is, it's the same approach that A Knight's Tale brings to Chaucer, is that he also disappeared for a minute, and they're like, well, what if he was the announcer for this night for a minute, and that's what he was up to when we couldn't find him,
right? Which
I just think was an interesting way of like starting a project like this,
right? Or the Agatha Christie episode of Doctor Who.
Indeed, yes. all exactly.
These are
on
all
the same level of cultural.
All on the same level.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, this is a essentially a fan fiction about Alluri Sitarama Raju and Ram Bheem, who are both real life historical figures. And I just think okay, so my question for you is, and this might just be what I've run into, my answer with this is that there's a cultural gap that is far enough that like I don't have a corollary to compare this to, a one-to-one. But like, what is for you, in your experience and your thoughts, what is the distinction between this and something like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter? Like what, when we're playing around with historical fiction.
I don't think that the corollary to this, and I've thought about this a lot, Parker, and we'll talk about it because I think the end credits is very interesting.
Sure.
And there are some things about this that we'll talk about. I don't think Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer is the corollary for RRR, Parker. I think it's Hamilton.
Interesting. That's a very good call. That's a good pull. I was going action brain. Yeah.
I think Hamilton is America's RRR.
Yeah.
In the sense that it is a movie that posits, what if we really liked historical figures in our history? And what if we changed something about how we tell that story? It's a little less fan fiction-y, but think about people's reaction to Hamilton and how much fan fiction was generated.
Fair.
And how both are kind of used, in a sense, to reignite some patriotism in the country while having some problematic glossing over tendencies.
Totally.
that have been well criticized by critics of these pieces of art.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that Hamilton is our RRR.
I
To
do. I
answer
like
your
that
question,
a lot,
to answer
actually.
your question, I don't know. But I do think, because again, I was looking at this and I was like, oh, like what is like, what is kind of the corollary of this? What's something that America would, or like, even just the idea of like, what would America's RRR look like?
Yeah.
And I went, oh, we kind of made it.
We kind of, yeah, that's a very good point, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Anyway,
yeah, I mean,
sorry
that's great.
Sorry to just throw my Hamilton take at you.
No, that I asked and you had a great answer. That's really, really well done. I like that a lot. And does bridge the gap mentally for me that I was trying to like find a comparison here. I think that's really good. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to kind of start with that table setting of just like,
Great.
oh, this is filling in a historical gap with something very fan fiction, which I just think is a fun approach to begin a project.
Absolutely. It is very interesting. Yeah, that is very interesting. I think that potentially America has like, well, not what I meant to do. Sorry, everyone. I'm just messing with my virtual settings on Zoom. If you're watching, you can see it. If you're not watching, if you're just listening, my apologies.
Nothing happened.
I'm gonna leave it where it is. I don't know if I mean, unfortunately, I imagine there's a lot of very right-wing fan fiction that is like this.
Sure.
That is like, what if these two guys saved America? Like I feel like that it's
somewhere like
between.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say somewhere between Hamilton and those paintings of like all of the Republican presidents hanging out.
Yeah.
I
was just gonna say it's kind of like, it reminds me of, I don't even know the name of it, the Netflix animated movie with Channing Tatum as George Washington or whatever.
Yes. Yeah. I just thought of that as well.
Kind of
ours is art, but that I feel doesn't come from. I mean, that one is particularly kind of more parody than anything else. I don't know. Does One Night in Miami count?
Maybe.
Which obviously poses the question: what if these five, like icons of Black culture in America ended up in the same hotel for one night, basically, right, and had a conversation?
Yeah.
Somewhere between Hamilton and that.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Toss in some Top Gun Maverick for good measure and you're set.
Absolutely. Yeah. What if One Night in Miami, Hamilton, and Top Gun Maverick were all the same thing, and that would be your American RRR?
There you go.
Yeah. Very interesting. But RRR is what it is, and we're going to talk about it. And I'm excited to hear what you have as far as what you learned from the behind the scenes documentary. Just did a quick perusing of Letterboxd reviews on that, and people are glowing about it.
It's really well done.
Very curious to hear what shot you would have bet $100 as CG. And was done practically.
We'll get to it.
I'm very excited to hear about it. So I think let's dive right in.
Marvelous.
To the summary. The story is how this movie opens.
R story.
Capital R in story, because there's an R and then it becomes the R in story. The story. Mali, a young girl from the Gond tribe in wow, my screen is just a little too far away.
A little tiny.
Adilabas is kidnapped from her tribe by Governor Scott Buxton and his wife Catherine. What do you think about this as an opening?
It's very effective. It sets the tone very quickly. And it also shows us the moral brushstrokes the movie's painting with, right? Like there is no subtlety to our British villains at all in this. It is they are cartoonish in their awfulness, and it's like, okay, this is the world we're living in, right? This is how we are operating, which works well. Something that does intrigue me, and I think it's intentional in a lot of ways, but it is surprising to me how many people, again, having watched this so many times with so many different people, every single time when Molly's mother gets cracked over the head, everyone's like, oh, she's dead. Like
Yeah.
she's dead. And then the very tail end of the movie, I missed it the first time. I don't
I
think
know,
I
I was
clocked
there.
it when we watched it.
Yeah,
the
we
first
didn't
time.
clock it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the second time
we
like,
were too busy
oh my God.
freaking out and discussing over the movie that we just watched and we missed it.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah, just that's something that is consistent every time I've seen this with somebody, is that everybody's like, whoa, holy crap, she's dead.
Something else that is particularly enjoyable about watching this film as someone who is, native English speaker is seeing villains in a movie who are like speaking English sound how we used to dub and often still dub villains in our action movies. Like
Totally.
the English feels so stilted but like not in a bad way. It just feels stilted. Like it feels very almost intentional to me. And I just really enjoy it as like, this is like these people are so cartoonishly evil, and isn't that nice? Like,
yeah. And like, we'll get to this later with it too, but it does, again, it's so funny to me as just like a characterization bit that, Molly's mother throws herself in front of the car, and one of the British soldiers comes up behind her, is going to shoot her in the head. And Governor Scott gets out and yells at him. And he's like, do you know how much the bullet in your gun is worth? And goes on this whole spiel. And he's like, it cost, £1 sterling and all this stuff. And he goes on and on. And later in the movie, we see he's been practicing this speech for 25 years and adjusting for inflation each time. I'm just like, man, that's such a good character beat that this guy is just like, man, that's a good monologue.
It's a great detail. He had to adjust for inflation.
It's so funny. But yeah,
and despicable,
I think,
Parker.
Totally.
And
yeah,
it's despicable.
Awful. And he's despicable, and I hate him. Man, that was the first thing I said to Will when we watched this. I just said, man, R.I.P. Ray Stevenson. He's great in this. He's really good. Lost too soon.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of his game until this, and lost within a few years.
Yeah.
Really sad.
What do you think of this opening?
Oh, I like it.
Yeah.
I want to talk about it in conjunction. I think you've covered everything I want to talk. I want to talk about it in conjunction with the next two parts of the intro.
Great. Yeah.
Because then we get another R, and this becomes the R in the fire.
Yes.
And we see Aluri Sitarama Raju. He is an imperial police officer stationed at some sort of house. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I've written here, beats up 1,000 guys to bring a rioter into custody, which is really dismissive to the thrill that is this opening action sequence.
So they're talking about this in the making of, and Rajamouli talks about how a huge source of inspiration for him is, mythology and legend and folklore. And he's like, yeah, there are Indian myths of these great heroes taking on armies entirely alone. He's like, and that is entirely what I want to be pulling from with Ram, is like introducing these characters as demigods, essentially, that they are mythic level heroes in a historical backdrop. And so that's like, all of this is inspired of like, okay, one man versus 1,000, and we're really going to crank that up. They shot with, I think, about 400 extras. Like those shots of them like piling and like all moving together, those are all real people. The wide shots, are kind of digitally duplicating those groups of people to make, the huge mob in the distance. But all of those, medium wide shots where you can see everybody just piling on him, it's just a bunch of dudes. And they had one of the stunt coordinators was in costume and he had a white flag. And so if Ram got lost in the mix, he would hold up a white flag. He's like, hey, lead actor's over here somewhere. Everybody stop. We don't know where he is.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty wild.
This scene has the shot. So the shot I would have bet money was CG is the hyper extreme close up of his eye and everybody backing away after he's, after he's come back and he stomps his foot and he's like, oh shit. That's in camera. They have this crazy lens. They lit his eye. They got the reflection. They lined everybody up and they said, okay, take a step back. And they show you like the raw camera clip. It's all in camera. It's not touched up. Like it's just, they got that in camera.
That's amazing.
And I would have bet money that was composited. I would have been like, oh, okay, they did put, a spherical dysmorph on a shot of the crowd and then overlay them. No, it's real.
That's really cool.
It's really cool.
Wow. Yeah, I almost can't believe that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Ram brings this guy back in. Just an incredible opening action sequence. Really sets the tone for the movie of just watching one man fight through a sea of people.
Yeah.
Comes back, he scares me more. Is like
So with
really great.
that line, I have a question for you, which is you were talking about kind of the broad brushstroke we're painting our villains with and like their characterization and the way they speak. And it's interesting because a lot of the time when I watch this with people, people will point to the English speaking actors and say, "Oh, that's cheesy. They're doing a bad job." And it's like, no, I think they're doing an excellent job. I think they're doing exactly what is asked of them.
It fits
Because
with the movie.
totally, because all the other performances, if you were applying that same kind of Western Hollywood standard of film acting to, all of these performances could be considered cheesy and over the top. And so I like the fact that the villains, and it's like, oh, I'm scared out of my wits. Like, that dude's operating on the same level as everybody else,
Yeah, they all exist within this world, and it's a great commitment to the world that this movie exists in. Right.
Totally. Yep.
I mean, I think that it's still early enough that right after this, Ram is, he, despite his immense effort, he is not awarded the rank of special officer, and he goes home and he beats up a punching bag.
Blows it up.
I think that's still, he blows it up with his, yelling and screaming and punching. And I think that's still early enough that I think most people new to the movie are like, what? Like, that's ridiculous. But then later when he's doing that, it really hits properly. Totally. But I think that for a lot of, Western and like American audiences, I think we're still at a point of like, maybe this is interesting. We'll kind of talk about like points of buying in and where we think people tend to buy in. I think we're still early enough that people are like, that was an incredible action sequence, but now he's crying and hitting a punching bag and screaming. It's like, oh, okay, all right. Like,
totally. Yeah. Because something that about American audiences is that films like John Wick have allowed us to accept bombast and action more. So we can look at this crazy, like over the top action sequence of one dude versus 1,000 and go, man, that's pretty badass. Like, I know, it's Fast and Furious levels of driving a car through a skyscraper, but like, I'm having a good time. I'm buying in. When you bring that level of bombast to emotionality, I agree. This first instance of it feels like, I don't know yet.
Yeah, it's very interesting. From there, we go to the water. The third R makes the R in the water, and we are introduced not to Bheem yet, but a man in a room with the most just weaselly looking British guy.
I love Edward. I love Edward. He's so good.
The actor playing Edward, and this is so good. There's a translator in the room, and this man has come into this kind of high-ranking official at the government, military's kind of outpost in Delhi, and is like, hey, I'm here to warn you because a young girl was taken from a tribe and we'd really like it if she was back with the tribe. And he's like, oh, whatever, he's like, okay, just so you know, there's a man who is the guardian of this tribe. He's a shepherd and he will come and find his lamb. And if the lamb is in the jaws of a tiger, he will break its jaw to save the lamb, basically.
Yeah.
And like, that's such a great kind of like foreboding kind of intro. And then,
well, before we leave that scene, there's a line that they do that, again, this movie is operating on direct setup and payoff that I really love, where Edward, he's like, oh, so what you're telling me is this, this simple tribal man is going to shoot down the mighty British Empire with his bow and arrow. And it's like, we'll come back to that.
Yeah. And then we go to the shot Parker mentioned earlier, our introduction shot to Bheem, which is you describe it, Parker. You've seen it 8 times.
It is like a tracking shot over a body of water, and it starts, and you see a very broad, muscular man with his back to the camera. And as it goes, the camera starts to rotate, and you realize that what you thought was top and bottom is switched because of the reflection in the water. And we get there, the camera rotates as it pushes in, and we land on the back of this man as he lifts a little bowl of blood and drips it onto himself ceremonially. And you're like, okay.
All right. In this sequence, he is, they've set a trap for a wolf. Wolf gets knocked out of the way by a tiger. He's being chased by a tiger. He's working with some other men in the tribe. And just a fun kind of action sequence of capturing a tiger, the reason for which is unclear to us.
Yeah.
But he apologizes to the tiger once it's under. He throws like a bowl of, knockout
herbs,
plant
whatever.
herbs. And apologizes and says, I do this to you for my own reasons, brother, and I'm sorry. To the tiger. I think we're still at a point where people would be able to just completely discredit this movie and be like, that looks so bad. The CGI animals look so bad. Like, we're still at risk of American audiences being like,
yeah,
this is ridiculous, right?
Totally. Because again, there are moments in here that are deliberately leaning into that of, the rope snaps and Bheem has to hold both ends, and to pull it back, he doesn't pull it back like any human being would do it. He does like a flexing pose,
right.
like he does the bodybuilder thing to get these two hooks back together.
Right.
And when they were doing this, they put counterweights on the other end of the ropes because Rajamouli's like, your muscles won't flex the right way if you're faking it. If you're just pretending to pull it, we have to put some weight on there. And there's like a shot of his calf muscle that is the craziest. I'm like, oh my God. Like, this is a very strong man.
It's a level of ogling at like male kind of musculature that hasn't been seen since like the height of Stallone and Schwarzenegger in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Like, sure, Marvel does a little bit, but Marvel is so against sexualizing the characters that you don't really get this kind of like hold on these kinds of moments with like male strength. And so I think for a lot of people, we look back at those Stallone and Schwarzenegger movies and go, oh man, those are like so over the top and ridiculous. Yeah. So we're still working within that framework.
Totally. Because we get a moment of it, right? Like that moment you were talking about with the tiger is like the briefest hint we have of like, okay, maybe there is more to this guy than just what we are bringing in as, okay, this is the muscle man stereotype. There's a sensitivity and a respect for nature of like, I'm sorry. Like he looks like he's going to cry as he's like cradling this tiger's head,
Right. That's like, okay, that's a great point of like reference of like, it's all of this that we're familiar with. And then there's a little bit of sensitivity. And then where we go, okay, interesting. Yeah. And then he puts on his disguise. And goes into the city and returns to the mechanic shop that he works at. Gets attacked by a British soldier policeman
who is accompanied by his 2016 Pinterest girlfriend.
Yeah. That part of the movie, you just have to be like, all right.
Yeah. Some of the costuming, especially for the women in this movie, is It could well be historically accurate. It doesn't at all look it, The
hair especially really falls into kind of, but whatever. That's where like, I mean, that's where it really requires you to have suspension of disbelief because the movie is already so heightened that any action that feels ridiculous is just part of the world. Totally. And so you just kind of go, okay, this is also part of that. Like you just have to be like, the costuming of all these people is also part of that. Meanwhile, in the exchange for the promotion he seeks. Oh, and I was going to say that another element of sensitivity is how Bheem, as in disguise as Akhtar, is, he plays it very like, I'm so sorry, as the man like hits him for, seemingly pranking him about his motorcycle.
Right.
But then, we cut to the house that he's staying in and the family's like, why don't you show him your anger? And he's like, I must stay disguised. And it's kind of this noble kind of like hiding that he's doing. He's like, I must,
he's like, I could kill this man, but I can't because I am here to achieve my mission.
Right. And I think around here is when it's like, oh, okay, we have similar characters in American fiction. Like this is kind of a Batman, a Superman kind of thing going on. So we're like, okay, we're there. Meanwhile, Ram accepts the task of finding Bheem, basically the mysterious Gond, tribesman guardian who's come to collect Mali. The British officials have offered him, the rank of special officer, and so he was like, "Would you like him dead or alive?" And who is it? She played Ilsa in Last Crusade.
Yes, I can't remember the actress's name.
Buxton. But she brings a certain level of what I guess I would call
Alison Doody.
Yes,
or Doty. Alison Doty
of what's the word? She's a sadist.
Yeah,
She brings a certain
100%.
level of horny malice to every line delivery in this movie, which is very uncomfortable.
There's a lot of like pursing of the lips and raising of the eyebrows anytime there's a reaction. You know, she's like very there's a
lot of
tightness
like,
about her.
Yeah. So Ram is now looking for this man who is Bheem, as we know.
Yep.
Meanwhile, as well, Bheem sees Jenny's kindness. There's a character in this called Jenny. She's the niece of Buxton.
Yes.
Okay.
Which
And
I did not know until you texted me your little fun fact about who is this supposed to be.
Daisy Edgar Jones was supposed to play this role, and then she couldn't due to family, something going on with her family, and she had to drop out. And once I read that I didn't know that before this watch, and I was just like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like,
makes a ton of sense,
and would have been very interesting. But also the actress who plays Jenny, she does great for.
I think
what
she
this
does a good
is.
job. Yeah.
As far as her role in the movie, not the movie.
Olivia Morris.
Bheem sees Jenny's kindness from afar and is like, maybe that's our way in, you know, because she lives at the house that Molly is being kept in. Ram and his uncle attend a who is also part of the police with him. They attend a pro-independence gathering in disguise. I love the CGI light beams in this room. It's fantastic. Really good. Just to add a little more to the scene. It's great.
My favorite thing about this scene, and it makes me laugh every time, is that, you know, the speaker is talking to the crowd and he's like, we must have for revolution. And Ram says, why beat around the bush? Let's just kill Scott. And the guy says, yeah, why don't we just kill King George while we're at it? And everybody laughs. He said, hear what he said? He said we should kill Scott. I told him, why don't we kill it? Like, he repeats the joke, and it's so funny to me every time.
Yeah.
He's like, this is what I said.
Yeah, that's always really funny. He's like, here's what I said. One of Bheem's friends, Lachu, attempts to recruit them into Bheem's plot because Ram is like, let's just kill him. Let's kill the governor. Let's kill this guy. I love the sensitivity of this man coming up and being like, hey, man.
Do you think you could actually do that?
Do you think you could actually do it? You should come with us. Like,
hey, I know a guy you should talk to.
Like, he's so sincere in being like, yeah, actually, that's really, come with me. But on the way, he discerns Ram's identity as an officer and flees. You know, classic running through all the alleys, escapes into a crowd. Ram loses him. We get that really big pullback to show the whole river scene.
Huge.
Really good sense of kind of showing us the geography of what's about to happen.
That was Rio said that out loud when that happened. She's like, yes, we are now setting the full, like, you know, where everything is at now for what is to come.
It's like ratio bars coming in on a video game, and you go, okay,
truly, all
right, boss.
Yeah. Here's the stage intro on Smash Bros. It's like, okay, there's the cliff, there's the little,
right. So Ram is kind of looking for the man. Lachu is his name, I suppose. He reaches Bheem and he's like, I messed up. But before they can really do anything, a train is on the bridge, and I really like this mirroring for Ram. I think, doesn't his uncle say, like, you'll never find him?
Yeah.
And for Bheem, it's like he says something. He's like, we'll never save Molly. And so it's both of them are kind of in this moment of like, is it really a lost cause?
Yeah.
And then I love the train coming on the bridge and the rumbling under Ram's hands as he takes this in. And then a child who just hopped in a boat to go get a fish. A leaking oil tankard is sparked by the train's wheels, and it bursts into flames and explodes and goes and enters the river. This boy gets trapped by a ring of fire in the river. And the only two people who really feel equipped to handle this is Bheem starts looking around for what he can do, and he looks up and Ram raises his hand. Yeah. Is it every time you show this to people, do people start cheering here?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a lot of,
yeah, because unbelievable storytelling at play here, of just like a rather very believable storytelling being done here, which is to say really great storytelling.
So this was a very interesting quote from Rajamouli in the making up about this scene, is that he's like, as a filmmaker, he's like, I'm really not interested in putting messages into my film. I don't use metaphor or allegory a lot. It's just not something that interests me very much. This scene, however, he's like, is fully designed that the child represents India surrounded by the fires of imperialism. And these two folk heroes that we have in our culture are going to come together to save India.
Yeah.
Which I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, he even picks up the flag. Like the flag is a big part of the imagery here. I do love how simple Ram's instructions are of just like crosses his arms.
Yeah.
Me go over
Links
this way, you
his
go over that way.
fingers together.
And Beam's just like, he nods.
Cool.
Like,
he knows. Got it.
Also, always love Beam on a motorcycle and Ram on a horse, even though
really good.
they come. Yeah, it's very interesting. And the one is very much a man of the city, and the other a man of the jungle. Even though they're both from, anyway, they're playing with that intentionally.
Totally.
This is big. This is them.
It's huge.
They go over the bridge. Mark's rubbing his temples. It's huge. It's huge.
It took them 14 weeks to shoot this sequence.
Okay.
It is crazy of like they were doing all this stuff and they're going through, and in the behind the scenes it's really funny because Ram Karan is talking about, it's like, well, the first day is very simple. It was the stuff us like getting ready and pointing at each other. He's like, and we do that first day. It's like, oh, it's going to be easy. This is going to be great. Like I don't even have anything to worry about. This is going to be such a breeze. He's like, the second day I was a little bit late. He's like, and I got there, and he's like, and Tarak had been, he's like, he was just hanging from the wires for like 45 minutes before I got there. They immediately got him up there. He's like, and we didn't get down from those wires for weeks. Like we were just up there doing this. So this is like, it's very interesting because they had set pieces. They had a water tank with the kid. They had the bottom structures of the bridge built, and then the rest of it's blue screened up. The train is a mixture of a real train in certain shots, a miniature when it explodes, and then some CG for the close-ups. There's some crazy amounts of stuff going on in this. Like it just there's wire work going on. Another thing that we can finish the sequence here in a minute, but there's something at the end of this I want to talk about.
Yeah, no, of course. Oh, okay. I mean, they go over the bridge. They, toss the flag. Like Ram scoops up, Beam scoops up the kid, and Ram tosses him the flag. He gets it wet first, so that he can
water.
Go through the fire. It's wrapped around him. It makes just enough sense that you're like, I buy in.
Yeah.
He just throws the kid.
Yeah.
And the kid lands on land, but he's fine. And then they come back together as they swing back together, kind of like a pendulum. They grip arms. Huge.
And title card.
I mean,
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, title card. Like that is
title card.
Then gripping hands goes into the title.
Yeah, and there's the title card. It's fantastic. I don't know the time. I don't know the time stamp for that, but
it's like 45, I think. It's either 40 or 45. So they untie the ropes and they drop down to the bottom. And they walk across the bottom of the river and clasp hands, and then it cuts to them being out, and we have this montage. But the thing about them being underwater reminded me of like they did that. Like they put the actor who plays Ram was having a hard time staying underwater. He was just too light. He's like, we put weights in my pants. That wasn't working. They end up giving him metal shoes. Like there was a strip of metal along the middle of the sole of his shoe. He's like, not enough that it would drown me, but enough to keep me down. And what would happen is that they had divers next to them, and they would take a bunch of oxygen, and then they had an earpiece that would be like, okay, 3, 2, 1, action. They take the oxygen out and just hold their breath and just walk towards each other and do the hand clasp. And again, it's just like commitment to the actual physicality of doing this. They rig up these giant, like 20 foot by 20 foot lighting panels because the cinematographer's talking about it. He's like, yeah, water distills your light. It disperses it. So we need to pump a ton of light in there for it to be lit the way we want it to on the bottom. And I was just thinking about a movie that other people talk about as like a masterpiece of filmmaking, and it is 100%. But even the Lord of the Rings trilogy doesn't do underwater. It's like noticeably jokey bad blue screen whenever they do underwater scenes of either Sam almost drowning or the intro at the beginning of Return of the King. Like, the underwater stuff sucks because it's not actually underwater, right?
Right.
And these guys are like, yeah, we'll give you metal shoes to make sure we do this right.
And like practically boil the tank under all these lights. Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Wow. That is wild. The
Yeah.
two movies brave enough to do underwater for real, RRR and Top Secret. Shout out Top Secret. Shout out Top Secret. Hell yeah. So they come up out of the water, Dosti. I mean, that's maybe, I think, the best song in the movie.
It's really good.
It's the running motif all throughout the rest of the film. This montage, I think, is where people are sold on the movie.
Totally.
This is the first fully onboarding point, is the train and saving the kid and all of that, straight into the title card and Dosti, the montage of them being friends.
Yeah.
I think is where people go, oh, I think I finally get what this movie is doing. And it's not necessarily they think that it's good yet, but they're like, I'm so on board for what this is going to be.
Yeah.
Right? Because the montage starts with them climbing up a tower of people that they just do in the moment. And, hit the melon or whatever that is with all the, and then it's them riding a horse and a motorcycle together through kind of the countryside. It's them walking and talking and laughing together, them jumping and racing a train, and it's just delightful.
Chekhov's piggyback.
Yes, was that James who
I think it was James. It's really good.
It was a great review. Getting on each other's shoulders. They try to herd a goat back into its corral and a kid chases them away, and just like the most delightful montage of friendship maybe ever committed to screen, because really, it's not something that is shown. Male friendship is not something that is shown in this light in American films at all.
No.
At all.
Yeah, period. Like, it just isn't.
Here, and I feel like in Western civilization, it is either, like we were talking about, Lord of the Rings, an action movie with male friendship in it that is a quiet understanding of each other as they go through a war zone, right? And that is, that's also Saving Private Ryan, that's Band of Brothers, that's what that is.
Totally.
There's the wartime bond you form with your platoon. And then there is, being snarky to each other, begrudgingly working together in action movies. That's the Marvel approach. That is, Fast and Furious. That's all these things. Because even Fast and Furious has like, Mi Familia, but it's like, no, you guys don't love each other.
Right. And then
the most
in
we get
comedies,
is you'll always be my brother. And in comedies,
and in comedies, it's like, it's dipshit humor. It's like, God, you're such a moron, but I love you.
Yeah. And it's often immature men who also tend to compete with each other romantically.
Totally.
Right. This movie doesn't engage with any version of
Not
any
a
of that.
bit of it.
It is a true, sincere friendship. The line is said in this movie, your friendship is more valuable to my life.
Yeah.
More valuable to me than my life. Sorry, I messed it up.
No, you're good.
And it is wonderful.
You buy it. Like it's to your point about like
to be laughed at.
The wartime bonding we see a lot because that's the version of vulnerability men are allowed to have within American society and Western culture. This has a jovialness to it. Like, this opening sequence is just joyful of friendship, of just like, you make my life so much better. I love spending time with you,
Yeah.
And that's, and like, it's something that like you and I have talked about, personally, where like sometimes we'll watch movies with people, and if any males, like any male characters show any sort of affection for one another, it's like, oh, they're gay. And it's like,
right.
And that's fine. It's fine if they are. Nobody ever says there's something wrong with that, but it creates this dichotomy of like, the only way men can show affection for each other if it is romantic or sexual. It can never be platonic. And it's like, I always kind of grit my teeth a little bit, like when we hang out with some of our friends and they say stuff like that. I'm like, I get what you're saying, and I'm not upset at you for that. But like, can we not just have male friendship? Can that not be allowed, please?
Right. I think let's have representation of gay romance that genuinely leans into that and calls it what it is, rather than it being men being kind of friends and having to project gay romance onto it.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's room for all of that.
Totally.
And yeah, I agree. Never once have I looked at this movie and been like, they're gay.
Mm-hmm.
I look at this movie and I go, they're best friends.
They're best friends, man.
And why wouldn't you want them to be best friends?
Mm-hmm.
During this same montage, we learn about Sita, Ram's fiance, who is elsewhere. We don't really know much about it. He just, Bheem asks him about a necklace that he has, and he says Sita. Meanwhile, Ram is also still looking for Lachu, Bheem's friend. But before he can reveal, I love how this moment is played. We have this whole montage of them being friends and basically falling in platonic love with each other. And then right at the end, Bheem's like, "Hey, who are you looking for?" Yeah. And Ram's like, "Oh, why haven't I thought about asking you?"
I had an amazing moment this last time we were watching of, I love the way this movie is paced out in revealing its information, because as the montage is ending and he's going around and showing all those people, one of the new people who watched it, she said, "Why hasn't he shown Bheem?" And the next line was like, the next shot was them on the motor. It's like, "Hey, who are you looking for?" Like immediately the movie answered her question the second she asked it. And I was like, oh, that's so good. That's so good.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a good movie.
Good movie.
Ram's like, "Yeah, like I should show you." And Bheem's like, "Yeah, like if he lives around here, I'm gonna know him.
I'll know."
And I love how like sincerely, and Ram holds out the flyer and Bheem's kind of like waving to someone else. And then the flyer flies out of Ram's hand and lands in someone's clay as they make, a pot on the street.
Yeah, it gets all wet and dirty.
Ram goes and gets it. And he's like, "Oh, bummer." And then Jenny arrives. And it's really well paced distraction as well. Like they just immediately forget that because it was only a brief moment for both of them. And then everything with Jenny happens.
Yeah.
Which is, again, Parker, do we have a severe lacking of genuine wingman in movies as well in Western culture? Because as I think about it, movies like Hitch or shows like Freaks and Geeks, usually, or, even bad, good Fast Times at Richmond High. I almost combined Fast and Bad with Bad Times. Bad Times at the L Fast High. Whatever. But like in those movies, again, there's always a level of competition. There's a level of condescension. There's a level of like, "Oh, dude, you're terrible at this." And even though, they are playing on this kind of stereotype of Bheem being, kind of not as smart.
Yeah, at least not as socially aware.
Not as socially aware. Even though they're playing on that, Ram, it doesn't make fun of him for it. Ram laughs when something funny happens, when he says something funny, but is like, "No, this is what she means."
Yeah.
And it's genuine, it is sincere. And it's wild to me that we don't have more examples of that in American film, if not at all.
I agree.
Yeah. Yep. What if it was Hamilton and One Night in Miami and Top Gun Maverick and also Hitch all at the same time?
Perfect. Great. You got the green light. Make it.
But that's not even appropriate. Anyway. Anyway, I really like Ram's technique of throwing a bunch of nails on the road. They stop at the bench and he's
Looney
like, "No, because the car will stop here." Looney Styles. She hits the nails. Her car stops there. Setting him up, being a wingman. Bheem starts courting her. They go to the market. Where Bheem creates a bangle for her to take to Molly once he realizes that she's like, "Yeah, there's a girl staying with us."
Yeah.
Again, dramatic sting in the music. I love how Bheem immediately goes, "I need to make something." And the person
just like, "Yeah, sure."
"Yeah, sure, go ahead." It's fantastic. He makes the bangle. Jenny takes it back to the house. And when Molly receives it, she like sobs with hope.
Yeah.
And
Jenny goes, "I'm the best gift giver. I'm so good at this."
Jenny's obliviousness is fantastic and is always funny. Bheem and Ram attend the party because Bheem goes back home and to Ram's house. I don't know, they don't live together, but they
February 14th. It's a Valentine's Day movie. We connected that watching it. Is that he's like, wow. February 14th. That's today.
Whoa, it's a Valentine's Day movie.
It's a Valentine's Day movie.
Beautiful. And it is. And it is.
Yeah. And it is.
For every kind of love out there.
Absolutely.
What I've written here is Bheem and Ram attend the party Jenny invited them to, and oh my god, it's Natu Natu time. Yeah.
Oh boy.
This we
Okay.
do have in American movies. We'll have like a dance
Yeah.
number. We'll have a dance
Totally.
off. We'll
hmm
have this, but nothing that feels and looks like
So
this.
they shot this in Ukraine because they liked the colonial style building that they found, and so they shot this all in Ukraine. All of the extras are
Okay,
Ukrainian.
that
Um,
makes sense.
yeah.
That's interesting.
And it was really interesting that when they were doing this, they choreographed the scene together, and NTR Jr. and Ram were both like, hey, shouldn't we have like our own individual styles a little bit, like as characters? And Rajamouli's like, no, you are one person. Like that is the point of this. To the point that he had a monitor on set. It looked like it was probably 70 inches long. Like it was diagonal. Like it was a giant TV in the video village. And after every take, he would go through frame by frame and he'd be like, oh, hey, you got to that point 3 frames before he did. We got to do it again. Like
Wow.
like jokingly, they're all like, it's the behind the scenes is very funny of NTR Jr. just like shaking him by the lapels. He's like, all the work I did. He's like, yep, you're gonna have to do it again. Like,
It
but he's like,
is.
it pays off.
It pays off. It's uncanny to watch.
Yeah,
It's uncanny in a way that hasn't been seen for me on movie screen since like, Gene Kelly heyday. Like
truly.
it's an uncanny level of dancing ability that these two guys just knock out.
Oh, yeah.
It's also it this is kind of my ideal version of modern musical filmmaking. We talk about this a lot with musicals, we just saw Wicked last year, and that's a movie where it has the same problem that I think a lot of modern movie musicals have, which is cutting too much.
Yeah.
Cutting too much within specifically like one dance action.
Mhm.
Because this is a great example of having your wide shot tracking,
Yeah.
as they dance together. We can cut in, but it's like it's almost more like a music video how they're cutting around, where like they're cutting to specific shots. So that like Ram moves into frame as he speaks or sings, like it's great. Anyway, I just think it's a good example of, if you want to have more cuts, if you want it to feel more modern than say what Spielberg was doing in West Side Story, then I think this is a better way to look at it than say The Greatest Showman.
I think you're absolutely right. And again, it's filmed like an action sequence, but it's filmed like this kind of movie's action sequence. It's not cut within an inch of its life. It is everything. There is a geography to the space that you understand, and the players play within that. And in the documentary, the composer was talking about how when Ram gets the platter and starts drumming on it, that specific drumming pattern he does is like very exclusive to Indian folk music. Like that is a battle cry essentially of, hey, this is our kind of music. And like that very particular drum pattern is known to Indians very like intimately, and like that sends a message, and then the whole song is built around that beat, which I just think is really cool.
Very cool. A very well cast annoying white guy at the party as well.
Yeah, he sucks.
He's perfectly cast. He sucks so much. You just love to look at him and just be like,
I think my favorite line read he does is like, "This is disgusting. It's filthy." Like he just bites those words.
I hadn't caught it before, and I texted you about it. But when he joins in with him, he's like filthy, and Ram just like gives him like a 2 thumbs up. It's great. It's
really
so good.
I love the snap zooms at the end, which just like snaps every time they do like the kick motion. Oh,
it's great.
It's really good. It's really well done.
Wait, does Parker like this movie?
No. Not at all.
This is all an act. Ram sees that Jenny really wants Bheem to win, and he lets himself fall so that Bheem can win, which is a great bro move. Very kind. Jenny invites Bheem back to her house for tea, and I like that she tries to excuse it, where she's like, "Sorry, I'd take you too, but it's a 2-seater." I'm like, all right,
really funny.
I think Ram's pretty clearly on your side here. But this does spark in Ram a realization, because he sees some painting that was done on the back of Jenny's car, and he remembers that Lachu, when he put his hand on his shoulder, had green paint under his nails. So he goes, I know where he must be. Exactly. So Jenny and Bheem go back to the governor's house, and Bheem sneaks away. He finds Molly. He can't get her out then. He says, I'll come back for you. It's very sad. Okay, have we hit any points where people are fully locked in that weren't locked in before? Like Natu Natu, is that a big swing
I think
point for
Natu
people?
Natu fully gets everybody in. Like people lose their minds at Natu Natu. And again, that was like, it was interesting because I remember seeing the intro of Bheem, the first thing that kind of trickled through. And then like a month later, everybody online was losing their mind over Natu Natu. Because I think they posted the clip online of the musical number, and everybody's like, holy shit.
Well, and when the movie was coming out in India in theaters, people were learning the dance. It went viral in India, and people would go up at the front of the theater and dance along and do the move. It's just great. It just seems really delightful, like throwing rice and confetti into the air during the movie. Like every clip you've seen of people reacting to Endgame in America is completely blown out of the water by Indian audiences reacting to RRR.
They have
find those clips online. They're great.
They're really good. They have some in the documentary. They also have a bunch of footage from the Chinese theaters showing of it in LA, and that's really good footage of people just going crazy for this thing.
This movie's nuts, man. It's so good. Seeing it in theaters was fantastic. Yeah. Even though like a few seats down from me, there was a guy who every time something was about to happen, he was like, "Are you guys ready for this?" Like he'd seen the movie before, and it was me. It's the one time I've been really mean to someone in a theater. Well, it was. I've started being meaner to people in theaters, which is to say, telling people to shush a lot quicker than I used to. Yeah. Because, and this is where it started, Parker. This is my history with RRR. Is that when we saw this in theaters, I was so sick of this guy being like, "Are you guys ready?" I think it was in the lead up to Natu Natu. He was like, "Are you guys ready for this?" And I just out loud went, "All right." He was quiet for the rest of the movie. Thank God. So if you ever want to quietly devastate someone in theater, if they're talking, just go, "All right."
That's really good.
Yeah. So Ram goes and catches Latu and he apprehends him and starts interrogating him while he's being, kind of crushing his fingers with a stick. Yucky.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Latu catches a snake in between torture sessions and throws its abandoned crate onto Ram and warns him of his imminent death and that the antidote.
And he's like, not even the English have an antidote.
Yeah, he's like, the antidote is only known to the Gonds.
I don't think he even says that. I think he just straight up says, he's like, "Oh, there is no cure. Not even the English has one. Have one," which makes Bheem's actions like and his knowledge, useful and very interesting. It's like, oh yeah, no, like he knows things the British don't.
Right, and but also after he's been poisoned, Ram sets him free. Yeah, which is kind of our first real hint of like what's going on with Ram. Like this whole time we've known that there's something, but this is where we're kind of like, what's his deal? Like, what's he working towards? Bheem finds Ram, saves his life because Bheem's getting ready for a plan. They have a plan. We don't know what it is yet. There's been some, feeding meat to a door,
unseen door,
giant meat to through a door,
big
to
meat.
something, big meat through a door, but we don't know what the. I'm glad that's out there. Glad that's out there.
Clip that, please.
Oh, just me and Barker going, big meat through a door. Anyway, I really like this moment of Ram, hitting something so that Bheem gets Bheem's attention. Bheem comes around the corner,
which
saves
comes
his
back
life.
later. I did not realize until the documentary. Somebody points that out, and I'll talk about it at the end of the movie. That I was like, whoa, yeah.
Okay. Bheem saves his life, divulges his tribal identity and mission, unaware of Ram's true identity, and it is heartbreaking.
Yeah,
it's heartbreaking every time watching Ram, who is indisposed by the poison in his body, put this all together and also Bheem explains it and just trying to catch him. I always put it to people as like, this movie posits, what if Jean Valjean and Javert became best friends without knowing it?
Yeah,
like
truly.
that's kind of the dynamic that these two have for the first half of the movie. Of like, it's that level of like, I need to capture this person. And watching Ram react to that, I do love that Bheem is like, you should be healed by tomorrow, and then he leaves, and then within minutes Ram is like
I'm back,
walls
baby.
and like screaming, crying, throwing up, truly
punching
through a wall like it's butter.
Yeah.
And
we start seeing flashes of something when this happens. We don't know the context.
We don't know what it is, but flashes of something regarding Ram. That night at an event to honor Governor Buxton, Bheem's men barge into his residence with a truck filled with wild animals, and they set them all loose.
So the making of this sequence might be one of the craziest things I've ever heard about. They start planning this whole thing out. They have 1,300 extras planned for this. British soldiers, people running around, all this stuff, right? They start organizing everything, start getting everything together. Right before they shoot, everything gets locked down for the pandemic. Everything's shut down for like 7 months. They can't do anything. They get permission to start shooting again, and they start doing all the safety protocols, doing all this stuff. So all of this sequence is done in the middle of the COVID pandemic, which is crazy that they pulled this off. And part of that, what they used, and this is so interesting, the way they filled that time is that Rajamouli sat down with the VFX artist. He says, okay, let's do all the animations first. Let's take 7 months and do all the animal animations first. And then we'll time out the live action to the animation so we're not wasting time. So they did all the animal animation. They locked it in with a virtual camera so that they knew where everything was. And Rajamouli's explaining, he's like, well, we have an issue of if we put the tiger over here on the left side and everybody's looking to the right, we're screwed. They're not looking in the right place. So what they did is that they have the animation playing on a monitor, and that monitor is connected to a computer that is connected to a string of LED lights on poles that have individual bulbs. And the bulbs move as the animation moves. So you just follow the light on the string, and that's where the tiger is.
Whoa.
It's great. I've never heard anything being done like this before. And so they would go back and they would do other takes because they're like, hey, you need to fall like half a second earlier. The leopard already got you.
Whoa.
And so they have strings on lights. They have RC cars with like animal heads of foam running through the place so that people have something to like react to. When the leopard jumps on Bheem, it's just like a soccer ball, a football that like he grabs and then he throws at the next guy. But all of this was timed out because they're like, okay, we can't film anything. What can we do to be productive? Let's do all the animations for the film while we're in lockdown.
That's bonkers.
And then we'll film around it.
It's so interesting.
It's crazy.
I guess I was just assuming that they did it like everyone was reacting and then animated the animals afterward. Like,
yeah,
but now that I think about it, I'm like, no, it's too exact for that. Like,
it's too exact. Yeah, they did all the animations first and then timed it out like dance choreography.
That's wild. Why? Yeah. That should be used every time.
It's like I mean, I guess LED lights was so cool.
The difference being that the American film industry doesn't often let visual artists have that much time to plan everything out. Right? Like we have the exact antithesis to that. But that is an improvement on the tennis ball method, at least.
Huge. Yeah, it was like the behind the scenes footage of this whole sequence is insane. Just hearing them talk about how it's all put together.
Documentary.
It's so cool. And even like stuff that, like we'll get to in a second, but like the fountain exploding and like all of the hoses, those are all real. Those hoses are just, those are all just, they like had like high pressure hoses and they put more extra air in them because he's like, Rajamouli's like, I want them to move like snakes. And so they did that. Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
It's crazy. They had firecrackers on strings to like go specific places when like Ram has his moment with the fire.
That's not all wild. Just CGI.
No, there is practical elements to every single piece of that sequence.
What the hell?
It's crazy.
Oh man.
Yeah. Oh. Absolutely wild.
Next time you watch your ninth watch is just going to be like when you watch Coraline. You're just going to be like headache.
It's going to kill me now.
Sorry, you ruined the movie for you.
I think I ruined the movie for myself. Oh yeah, so this whole sequence is bonkers.
Yeah, so the animals maul all of Scott's guards and creating havoc among the guests. The awful racist man from earlier who assaulted, attacked Bheem at the mechanic shop gets gorged by an antler. It's brutal. This movie's rated PG-13.
Is it really?
I thought I saw that on your Plex when I went to watch it. I could have
sworn it was R. Let me double check.
Is it? Because I think maybe Plex was wrong.
Plex might be wrong. Let me double check Letterboxd. But yeah, I mean, it's intense either way. Uh, oh, does Letterboxd
Oh,
not
it's
tell you? I could've sworn-
TVMA is what it's rated
TBM.
as.
Okay, okay, gotcha.
So that's probably why Plex was like PG-13. I don't know.
Yeah, probably got
Interesting.
confused.
It probably is rated R, but it is, I don't know, because there is a lot
Yeah.
of blood in it. So
Mhm.
I was like, what? Okay, never mind. Disregard. Ram arrives, fights Bheem. They do like basically an Avatar: The Last Airbender fight with water and fire.
There were two observations made from our viewing party who hadn't seen this before, which was as Ram is riding up, immediately somebody goes, "Oh, so is this movie Godzilla versus Kong? Is that what we've been building to this whole time?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other thing at the end of the movie, we were talking about it, and something one of our friends observed is that she's like, "I loved that I could see like the dark scenes, I could actually see what I needed to." And she said, and that moment with Ram coming in and you can't see him, he's shrouded in shadow. I had a moment, I was like, "Huh, I can't see him." And I immediately thought, "Oh, it's because the filmmakers don't want me to see him." Like that's a
Right.
choice. It's not a mistake.
Right.
Which is just something, especially like, people have been complaining about for the past at least 5 to 10 years in American cinema is just like, I can't see shit. Like it's so dark. I can't see anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is just interesting.
It's nice to know when something is an authentic choice. Ram does enter on a flaming chariot. It's kind of reinforcing, basically a chariot,
Yeah.
He and Bheem fight. What do you think about this fight, Parker?
This fight is everything you're supposed to feel when Anakin and Obi-Wan fight. Like this is the level of like, "No, you're friends, my babies. What are you doing?"
Yeah.
That like you want to get from something like that they don't earn
true.
it because they don't spend enough time on that relationship. But like it's heartbreaking. It's like you are drawn in by the spectacle of it and the brutality of it, but the whole time you're like, "But you guys are friends.
Yeah.
Like, please, no, don't do this."
You feel it with them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They fight. I mean, Ram at one point smacks the tiger away with like a metal
he like cocks
sconce.
it first. It's
crazy.
With
like a fiery sconce. It's great. Bheem is forced to stand down. We do get like Matrix levels of CGI Bheem running across the rooftop of the building, which is great. It's good.
Yeah.
It's whatever. It's like the one thing really that stands out.
Totally.
But they fight some more on the terrace. Bheem is forced to stand down. It ends with, Bheem dangling over and Ram holding on to him, and blood drips from Ram's head to his eye. It makes a blood tear that hits his arm, drips down his arm. Intermission title card.
Jesus.
Like at this point, Bheem is forced to stand down when Buxton holds Molly at gunpoint. Bheem is arrested. Ram is promoted. But I remember when we hit this intermission on our first watch through and we paused it so, people could use the bathroom. And we were just like, there's an hour and a half left.
Yeah.
Like we knew it was 3 hours, but like that first half flies by so quick that by the time you reach this point, you're like, what is there even left to do?
And that is like, that is consistent. Every time I've shown this to somebody, people have that reaction of like, that's not the end of the movie? That wasn't the climax? I'm like, oh, no.
No. Shout out to
good.
intermissions. Just enjoying intermissions.
Big fan of intermissions.
We saw Lawrence of Arabia last year. Loved that intermission. Recently watched The Brutalist. I have thoughts about that movie, but the intermission was fantastic. I just enjoy an intermission.
Nice.
Didn't
know it had one.
It does. Yeah. Intermission. And then you come back for part 2. Everyone gets up and they get their snacks. They go to the bathroom. You discuss what's going to happen next. Come back. Ram flashback time. This is where the movie goes, all right, we've given you long enough. No more
messing around.
Yeah, no more messing around. But also specifically, we need to explain who this man is.
Yeah.
Because we have explained very thoroughly who Bheem is. And you know what Ram's actions are and have discerned who he is based on his actions. Now we're going to show you his motivations. Totally. So we go back, we see Ram as a kid. He, his father, Alluri Venkatarama Raju, which I butchered, but that's okay, was a revolutionary who hoped to arm his village with British rifles. He used to serve in the military for the British. And he actually he saw, this is what Parker was alluding to earlier, 25 years of Buxton giving this speech about, the worth of a bullet, because Ram's father saw him give this speech. We also see that Ram was an incredible shot as a kid, and one day he has to help his father fend off an army of British soldiers with one gun and some dynamite.
And Ram's father takes the monologue about the bullet and he applies his own logic to it, where he's like, the only way this bullet earns its value is if it pierces the heart of a British man. That is how it earns. It came across the English Channel in a British ship. This is how it earns its value. Will you increase the value of a bullet? Is what he says to his men.
Which is the line. Yeah. Which is a hard line.
Hard line.
Ram's brother, mother, and father are all killed that day. I mean, I don't think we need to dive super deep into this, but it's a really fantastic sequence.
Very well done.
A lot of killing British guys. Just pretty cool in this movie. I made it sound like I was hiding something. I'm not. I just meant in this movie because I realized it wasn't great to just say, it's pretty cool to kill British guys. But I just mean in this movie.
Right.
They're the villains. He subsequently leaves his village in Sita to infiltrate the British military police so he can steal their weapons and arm the revolution. So that's Ram's whole thing.
Yep. We get it all laid out.
Recontextualized.
Yep.
What is people's reaction to this, Parker?
A lot of more heartbreak, more understanding of like, oh, okay, because like I've seen sometimes where we get to intermission and people are like, no, Ram sucks. God, that sucks. Like, I hate this guy. And then they get there like, oh,
again, great pacing on the movie's part of the minute people are having a thought or a question, the movie goes, all right, here you go.
Yeah,
like just recognizing where people are at.
Totally.
Also, somewhere in here, we get one of our favorite scenes, which is Sita waiting on the shore for Ram to come back. And a man goes, Sita, and she turns, and it's the
whole village.
The whole village of just like a bunch of men have all come out, and like two of them talk to Sita, and then the minute that those two guys are done, everybody else leaves.
They just all leave together again.
And it's unintentionally, maybe it's just very funny to me every time.
Yeah.
Of just the entire village comes out to be like,
did he forget about us?
Yeah, we don't think he's coming back.
Yeah.
Bheem is flogged publicly. But now that we know Ram's motivations, it's tragic that he's the one who has to do it. Just really good. I think Ram even writes to Sita and is like, I feel terrible.
Yeah, I don't know what to do anymore.
To my best friend. I don't want to be around anymore.
I don't want to be around anymore.
What, you mean you want to die? I don't know.
Ram and Sita be like.
Yeah. Bheem sings as he bleeds out, which is a beautiful scene.
It's a really good scene. It's really well done. And just like, it's interesting hearing them talk about it in the documentary of Rajamouli says that, which he directed the documentary, which is very unusual for behind the scenes documentaries. Wow. Yeah. But he talks about how he's like, throughout the history of India, like a big part of revolution is song. We have songs for everything. We have songs for every aspect of revolution we've experienced. He's like, it was very important to us that like, that is what mobilizes the people, is this, impassioned plea in song from Bheem. And it's effective. It's really good.
It's very effective and it's a great song. Sparks a small riot. Ram is inspired by Bheem's ability to make the people into weapons instead of just arming them. He makes plans with his uncle to free Bheem and Molly at the same time as he kind of makes off with all of the weapons that he's planning to steal, now that he's a special officer.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Ram didn't clean his hands well enough after messing with all of the guns of all the officers who were going to be escorting them to the execution site.
And he was too nice to
catches
Molly.
on. Yeah, Buxton catches on and the plot goes awry. Parker, do you want to talk about? Do you want to mention it? Do you just want to mention it?
I love it so much. Of just Ram is ahead of them, and he speeds up, and Buxton realizes it's a trap. A tree tries to make a tree fall on the convoy so he can get away from them, and the tree lands on the front of the car. Buxton is launched into the air. He grabs his like over-designed rifle in midair.
That launched up with him.
Yep, immediately. 360 no scopes this car, and Ram and Molly get launched out of it, just like boop.
The car, he hits the tire of the car like springs to the right, and they just like
They just launch.
launch really fast. It's kind of
Ray Stevenson, he said that when they did that sequence, I don't know what shot specifically it was. I'm guessing it's the wide slow-mo shot of him grabbing it, because like they show it happening, and there's like, you know, a grip off screen who like tosses the gun up to him, and he catches it in midair and then does the motion or whatever. And Ray Stevenson's like, yeah, I sheepishly went to the cinematographer and said, could you please send me that shot so I can send it to my kids? Because he's like, it's a really cool shot.
It's a really cool shot. It's very cool. Ray Stevenson looks great in this movie. He's just he's a great villainous presence.
I'm a big fan of his like voice and diction delivery of like, I want to see his eyes pop and his neck snap.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah. Bheem and Molly escape, but they think that Ram was attempting to kill them.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't get a chance to explain it. It's unclear.
Another one of my favorite audience reactions happens every time, where you think that Bheem has stabbed Ram through the neck with this chunk of wood. Yeah. And then the camera pans back and it lets you think that for a minute with the angle, and then it cuts the reverse and he's fine. But every time people go, oh!
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good movie.
It's a good movie.
Months later, it's wild. This movie's just like, oh, and it's been a few months.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay, great. Okay. Ram is set to be executed after months of imprisonment. Meanwhile, on the run, Bheem and Molly run into Sita, who has arrived in Delhi to collect Ram's body after his execution. The actress who plays Sita, I really like her. She's good.
She's really good.
She's smart. She's cool. She unveils Ram's motivations to Bheem, who is distraught. And we get the conclusion of the flashback of Ram had to shoot his dad with dynamite on him to blow up all the soldiers. It's just a quick conclusion to that.
Yeah.
Really like how he plays his reaction as Bheem to like hearing all of this.
Yeah.
It is one of the lines that I bump up against the most, which is, I'm a simple tribesman. I couldn't understand his plan or his motivations.
Yeah.
Which is every time I've seen it, I've been like, I don't know. Like the more that these two men are equal is the more I'm on board. And every time that there's like two lines specifically where it leans a little away from that. And we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about it because it ties into kind of what you're talking about with some of the characterization of his kind of social ineptness. And we'll talk about that. But
yeah. But he's like, I will save him. I do love it.
I love what you texted me about this. Of this line.
Yes.
Shepherd
he
thing.
says, where Bheem says, you know, I will bring your ram back to you. Like I will go and find him and I will return your ram to you, which is just a great follow-up to the shepherd introduction we had.
Yeah.
And like just levels of like just like, I don't know. I imagine that someone writing that line just went, oh my God. Like
when important
one of our characters' names is spelled like a name for a sheep, and we introduced Bheem as a shepherd. I don't know if it was from the beginning, but whoever had that initial thought must have been like, yeah, all right.
Hell yeah.
Like that's just serendipity, you know?
Yep. Absolutely.
It's really good. And one of Bheem's, like, I think one of his great moments is when he gets to say that.
Yeah, it's really good.
I always forget about it, but in this quick little montage we have of him going in to save Ram, we see that Jenny helps him, which I always
Jenny
forget.
gives him the plans.
But Jenny gives him the plans for the prison so that he knows where to go.
Yeah.
Also, the beat that Bheem like smacks onto the ground is the same beat as the start of Natu Natu, which is great.
It's also the same beat. It's also the same beat as when Ram is trying to get Bheem's attention when he's poisoned. It's the beat he does on the like metal pot.
Yeah, which love it. Yeah,
really good.
Bheem saves Ram from the prison, and it's really great. I mean, Ram's on his shoulders because Ram's legs have been incapacitated.
Yeah.
And so it's this. It kind of achieves what Rajamouli was talking about of like, you are one person, and this is them working as one person, literally just one person with four arms. Yeah,
he talks about in the documentary. He's like, they become a 10-foot tall mythic being with four arms. Like they are one Like it's there's a shot of like the British, one of the soldiers like coming around the corner, and then the searchlight flashes and it's just the shadow. That's a slasher shot. That's a
It
horror
is.
movie shot, and I
It
love
is of like a 10-foot tall beast with 4 arms.
it.
It's great. I love, Rom dual wielding, just shooting people. It's great. They
Beam
go up the
drifting,
tower.
like doing the just hitting the drift is so good.
Great action sequence. We can't even do it justice, but it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I like when they climb the tower.
Mhm.
Also, every time I think it's going to be the Arctic Monkeys song. Every single time.
Yeah, I think we all did that last time.
Yeah, every single time. I always forget, and then I'm like, what? And then I go, oh no, right.
Oh no, we're fine.
We get a little bit of the Dosti reprise, which has happened a lot of times, and I just didn't touch on it. This is the end of the movie. They escape the prison. Bheem applies a balm to Ram's legs that heal his legs. They take kind of a traditional garb from a kind of a statue. What would you call that? Like
it's like a shrine.
A shrine for Ram to wear. They both take on kind of these mythic identities of figures in Indian myth. They're pursued into the jungle by military forces, and they just take them down through the night. It's great to watch. What do you have to say?
So just there's something interesting about like taking the garb from the shrine, and it'll come into what we talk about a little bit later, but it was interesting hearing Rajamouli talk about it, which is that particular garb is what, the historical figure Alluri Sitaram Raju is known for. Like his statue is in that garb, to the point that Ram Charan, the actor playing him, he's like, I felt a huge responsibility like putting that costume on. Like when we did the costume fittings and all these things, he's like, it's iconic to our people of this is the way this guy looks. Like it's this might not be exactly one-to-one, but the closest thing I can think of is that like I've heard actors like Daniel Day-Lewis talk about like putting on the stovepipe hat of Lincoln feels like it's like, oh yeah, like I am doing something of this iconography, right?
Right.
Again, silly example.
I'm sure that the guy who played Abraham Lincoln in Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer also
he felt the same way.
thing.
I'm sure I said the same thing about it.
He was like, I felt a huge amount of responsibility.
Right. But what Rajamouli talks about, which I thought was interesting, and I don't understand the cultural context around these, which we'll talk about a little bit, but like he said that something him and the screener I wanted to do is that he's like, part of our fiction here is that Bheem gives Raju his iconic outfit, and Raju gives Bheem his iconic mantra, which is painted on his banner at the end, which is water, forest, land. And like that is historically what he is known for, and the costume is historically what Raju is known for. And so that was like Rajamouli's idea of like, okay, well, I like the idea that like these two people inspired these elements of like what we know them for going forward.
Yeah, which is a fun idea.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so they're in the jungle. I think you always get a big kick out of how bright the gunshots are from Buxton's house when he looks out across the jungle.
The muzzle flashes and like the mini nuke, like shockwave from the exploding motorcycle gets me every time.
Yeah, but I mean, I forget how many good action beats there are in this, particularly, shooting the arrow through the tree stops the arrow from hitting the guy in the eye. He turns, Ram comes and kicks it a little bit further, kicks the arrow into his head, and then fires another one.
Yeah.
But I think like the highlight is Bheem.
Yes.
A motorcycle is coming at him, and he like kicks it,
stomps the front wheel,
and it flips, and then he catches it,
grabs the back fender,
and then throws it.
And it's just like so much.
Nothing makes you realize how good action could be, like watching RRR and then watching, what we think of as like really cool creative action in America, and it's just like, no, guys.
Yeah.
No. Like and a good analogy is like in Captain America Civil War when like Sebastian Stan kicks someone off a motorcycle and then rides it. Like he hops on it and rides it. And I remember seeing that in theaters and me and my dad being like, whoa. And then you watch RRR and it's like, nah, guys.
Like, that's the thing, is like the way they do the fight choreography for Bheem specifically here is what Captain America fight choreography should look like, and we don't do it. Like, give him superhuman strength. Just do it.
Yeah.
Instead, like, Winter Soldier just gives him superhuman kicks. Like, he kicks people and they go, like, flying 30 feet. But, like, I just want to see him lift heavy shit, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, but we're very preoccupied with being grounded right now.
Yeah.
And have been for a long time, even when we're making big fantasy movies, you know? And also, I just want to say, I don't think either of us have intended it. I just don't want to seem like we're knocking on Dune at all. Dune being a really great... Dune being some really great, like a pair of really great American blockbuster films. I've just had it. I know I'm overcompensating and qualifying our statements, but I'm just saying, just shout out to Dune for being really good. Dune. And for being what it is. Okay, great. Just wanted to say that.
Glad you covered that base.
Just didn't want to be mean to Dune, Parker. All right. Well, so they kill all those guys.
Yep.
And then they launch a flaming motorcycle into the barracks magazines, setting it afire. Big explosion. I like the way that the top of the building gets like lifts up and then collapses back down. Was that a model?
Really nice. I think so. I think there are model pieces there for sure.
It's great. We come back from that giant explosion with Buxton's wife hanging and dripping blood onto him, which is a great shot. Very eerie, very good. I just think it's a great,
and specifically like the blood going over the tattoo on her hand that started this whole thing.
Yes. Yep.
It's good.
Good. I love that Bheem just carries out these giant pallets of just weapons for Ram. Ram is like, nice. Ram lets Bheem load the gun as because he nails Buxton into like a wall behind him with an arrow in his shoulder. And then he delivers his father's speech, like a combination of Buxton's and his father's. And basically it ends with, will you increase the value of the bullet? And Bheem does, and they shoot him, and it's great.
Aim, shoot. And then again, because subtlety is for cowards, splash of blood. The sun never sets on the British Empire.
Yes. Yeah. Blood splashes across a flag that says the sun never sets on the British Empire. It's great. And then it's, they take all the guns and to like a field somewhere, and Jenny's there and Sita's there, and it's just a nice.
We joke this time like Sita runs to Ram and like grabs his hand and like they're reunited. And I think somebody was just like, oh no, he's even hotter now. Sita's like, what am I supposed to do with this?
And then the last lines is Ram saying, thank you for this garb. Basically, he's like, thank you for this look, and I'm going to use this as I continue to do historical events. And then he says, what can I give you? And Bheem says, brother, teach me to read and write. And then they write the mantra on the flag. They wave the flag. End credits, which is a big fun dance number song about raising the flag and hey, look at all these great political leaders. And this is where I go, all right, I don't know. It's so weird to be completely distanced from a culture.
Totally.
And to just be like, I don't know enough about these guys, but like, I think just alarms are set off in my head anytime there's like a big song about how great history of our nation is, and look at these men. I just think as an American, I'm just very wary of like,
totally.
I don't want to just be like, I believe you.
Okay, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about
the caste system.
The caste system, as two experts on the subject.
We'll be brief, but it's important to mention it in the same way that we bring up things like this in every movie we cover on the show.
Right.
There is cultural context to this.
Yes. Do you want to lead out?
Oh, sure. Sure.
You give some
lead out with with that Vox article I read, which is to say that this movie does perpetuate a certain level of classism and racism toward a very specific group of people, and perpetuates stereotypes about them. The filmmaker Rajamouli, he has a tendency of doing this. He comes from a very privileged background, and this movie basically reinforces a certain perception of certain groups of people within India and within its class system, within its caste system. And that's that's the gist of it. I think we can,
Yeah.
if you know more, we can dive a little deeper.
No, it's kind of, it's, as I was understanding it, there's a big shift. There's a big tension between specifically like Hindus and Muslims, and like culturally and religiously, and that's a big part of what is being talked about when people talk about this with the film. And to your point of these ideas of like Bheem being presented and referred to as a tribal and being kind of the dumber of the two. Like, he's not stupid. The movie goes out of its way, and that's the thing. Like, the movie does not paint him as somebody who needs educating and who doesn't understand the world around him. There's one or two lines that, again, you're like, oh, I'm so simple that I couldn't see the vision he was going for. And I'm like, okay, don't love that line. And then the read and write thing, I understand, like the cultural rub up against.
And from what I understand, specifically him asking, teach me to read and write, the historical figure himself was a very well-read and like famous for some of his writings, from what I understand. I may be misremembering that, but like I see from what you said of like what Rajamouli is doing there, but also it's like, well, okay, but like he could also just be that.
He could just be that, totally.
Right. And also, from what I understand, each of the figures that they show in the end credits are particularly like Hindu and are of, I think, of like that same kind of
like class.
Yeah, and the same caste. Exactly. Right.
Yeah,
and so
totally.
that's kind of, it's just, it's playing with that, from what I understand.
It is worth mentioning and talking about. And there are people who understand this a lot more than me or you do, course. And like could speak on this with a lot more authority. I've read a lot of different articles. There's a very good thread in the Blank Check subreddit where people are talking about this with a lot of like differing opinions and viewpoints. And something that somebody pointed out in there that I thought was really interesting was that I'm paraphrasing, but basically what they said was like, if this movie is anti-Muslim propaganda, it's not very good at it, because all of the Muslim characters in the film are shown to be loving and kind. They protect Bheem with their life. Like they're only shown in a positive light, Right. And so like that was something interesting that I thought somebody pointed out. It's like, yeah, like the same comment was talking about how like there are a lot of people with very bad bigoted intentions who have latched on to some of the things in this film and are like, oh, this is my thing now. And like saffron orange and the garb and things like that he's like, don't historically have their roots in being hateful, but hateful groups have adopted them. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And like that specifically, like people talk about that a lot in my reading, talking about Alurui Sitamara Raju. Like he is a figure that very extreme groups have like, oh, he's ours now. And it's like, no, you don't actually get to claim ownership of him at all, because his ideology had nothing to do with your ideology.
Right. But that's something that happens all the time in plenty of countries.
Totally. So I think like that was something a lot of people were talking about when like talking about the nuance of the film and its representations, is that it's like, okay, there is a blurry line here between, there are some very hateful people who've taken some of these ideas and iconography, and then there are people who are genuinely just proud of their heritage, right, and their culture as Indians and freedom fighter and things like that, right? So there's an interesting give and play there. One thing I will say that I think about a lot with this film, and like, because I've watched this 8 times and I've kind of heard about this stuff probably around the second or third time I watched it, did some reading, dug into it, and it's one of those things where I think if you are media literate enough to understand what propaganda is and that it exists, it doesn't make you immune to propaganda, but it makes propaganda lose a lot of its sway once you know what it is you're looking for, right? So same thing, like the first time I watched this, I get to the end dance number. I'm like, okay, dance number is really interesting and fun. Like you said, I don't know enough about these people to feel one way or another about the historical figures they're talking about. But I also, like, if Top Gun Maverick ended with a bombastic musical number with faces of George Washington and Teddy Roosevelt and Lincoln behind military imagery, I would probably be like, oh, wow, that's some pointed propaganda, isn't it?
Right.
And that's where I land with this movie, is that like as somebody who is removed from the cultural context of this, the most propagandized I feel when I watch it is walking away really hating imperialism more. You know,
Right.
like that is my Western takeaway from this movie. And I don't really think anything about the caste system or Hindus versus Muslim or anything like that. That doesn't mean that the conversations around it are invalid, because there are people who are much more informed about the culture that are having discussions around the film and examining what the film has to say about its own culture, right? But I will say that I've seen a lot of people have a very bad faith reading of this film that is like, if there's propaganda, that means you've been brainwashed and you buy into everything that is the worst possible read of this. And I don't think that's true.
Sure. And I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just my general 2 cents. But we're mentioning it. I'm glad. It's something I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. Initially, I had written end credits, aka Max becomes a party pooper ?
No.
But
we're on the same page.
I know. But I was just like, it was funny.
Yeah, it is funny.
That's RRR.
Mm-hmm.
Should we dive into criteria here?
I think so.
Do you have anything else to say before that?
No, just that I'm glad that you wanted to talk about all of that stuff as well. And like I said at the top, it is a 5-star movie that I understand there are elements and complications and propaganda within it that I don't fully understand.
Right. Yeah.
But I still think it's a 5-star movie for me.
Hey, this show is all about holding space for nuance, I would say.
Really? I'd say so.
Highly subjective show. So, Parker, historical and technical relevance. Do we not really know?
I think it's too soon. I think it's too soon. I will say, like, I do know that already it's making huge waves of bringing Indian cinema to a international audience in a huge way that has not been seen before. Like they talk about that in the documentary. They have the footage of this screen at the Chinese theater in LA, and the management, like the director was talking about, is like, I spoke to the management and they told me, he's like, we've never had people get up and go to the front during a dance sequence. And that happened here in America. Like people went down during Natu Natu and did the musical number and were losing their minds. Like, we've never had that at Grauman's Chinese Theater ever. Yeah. For anything. Yeah. And he's like, that's huge. That's a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, Natu Natu, I mean, it went to the Oscars.
Yeah.
I think this movie does have a place on the global scale, but also, you know, I mean, Citizen Kane is very specifically like a very, you know, American film in particular. And so obviously this episode, we've kind of looked at this through a lens of it coming overseas to here, which isn't, you know, it's not like that's exclusively where this film has merit. That's just our angle on it, obviously. Yeah. It kind of feels like Crouching Tiger to me. Like when we talked about Crouching Tiger last year, of like, that's another movie that we later saw more of the impact of.
Yeah.
And I think that RRR feels very similar to that as far as like action you've never seen before, bombastic emotion. And I think that we could see this have a similar impact with Indian cinema and Tollywood cinema here in America.
Totally.
I'll be curious to see that.
It's funny you should say that, because there's a clip in the documentary that had my wheels turning of Rajamouli talking about it. He's like, I got to meet my heroes. I got to meet, like, when we came to Hollywood with this, he's like, you know, there's clips of him talking with Steven Spielberg, and specifically there's an extended clip of him talking to James Cameron, and James Cameron just like heaping praise on this movie and talking about all the things he loves about the way it's structured. And I had a moment. I was like, if Avatar 3 has some RRR DNA in it, I would not complain. Could maybe get me on board with that, Jim.
Maybe we'll continue to give Jim a chance as two guys who don't like the Avatar franchise.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think the point still goes to Kane.
I would agree.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see where we land as time goes on.
Absolutely. How well do you think this movie's doing what it's trying to do?
Flawlessly. Like, again, especially after watching like the making of documentary, it seems like this is entirely the movie Rajamouli and the rest of the team wanted to make, and they did everything within their power to like achieve that goal in every aspect. So I would say I think it's knocking it out of the park.
Yeah, I agree. Is it doing better? Is it doing that better than Kane is for you?
I would say yes. It's
Okay.
close when I think about it, but like I do think I would give the point to RRR.
Great.
What about you?
I agree.
Okay.
I'll agree with you on that. How will you connect with this movie, Parker? This movie that's in your top 4 favorites with In Good Company, Porco Rosso. It's a Wonderful. Is it It's a Wonderful Life still up there? And what's the third one?
Cinema Paradiso.
Cinema Paradiso.
Yep.
Hey, we've covered 2 of those. Thought it was going to be more than that, but we haven't done It's a Wonderful Life yet.
Or Porco Rosso.
So I assume this connects with you.
Very much so. Absolutely. Yeah. What about you?
You've seen it 8 times. Yeah, I really like it. I was at a weird place with this movie. First time I watched it, I was like, woo, you know. Second time I watched it, I don't think I was in the right place for it. It was New Year's Eve. I've learned that New Year's Eve needs to be a different vibe for me.
Yeah.
I just remember walking out of that viewing just feeling sad for some reason. But then third time I saw it in theaters after a giant pizza meal with all of our best friends. Great time. Yeah. It's a great time. Fourth time I watched it. Well, there was a time in between where I had a panic attack right before, and then I had to leave movie night because I just was like, actually, I should probably just go home. So I was happy to return to this. I was happy to enjoy this movie again and connect with it again in a way that I really enjoyed. So I'm high on this movie right now.
I thought that was interesting. Like you texted me and you were like, I was a little nervous going in, and then I like locked in with it immediately. I was like, oh, it is as good as I remember it being.
It is, because it had been a while since I always like the theatrical experience was so good.
Yeah.
But as far as like watching it not in theaters, I'd only really had like one great experience with that since. So I was really happy to revisit it, to connect with it again, to connect with it in a way where I really enjoyed it. And
I'm glad.
It's a great movie, Parker. Good pick. Thank you for bringing it to the show.
Thank you.
Taking a step back, is RRR better than Citizen Kane?
I've got a full chest and I'm going to say, yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. Great.
Anything to dispute on that?
I've got nothing to dispute, really. I can't really argue with you, so I'm going to let you take it.
Yes. Hell yeah.
Will you say it?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, RRR is better than Citizen Kane.
Wonderful. Shout out to that clip of who is it at the Oscars where they say RRR? RRR. Shout out to that clip.
Yeah, that's really good.
And shout out to the caption that people always put with it, which is seals win something.
RRR.
RRR. Good movie. Parker, I'm weirdly ecstatic to say this. Next episode of the show is a movie that neither of us have seen.
Yes.
And it is Love and Basketball 2000.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty stoked.
I'm very curious. I'm very curious about it.
When was the last time we watched a movie we both hadn't seen before?
That's a good question.
I really can't remember.
Had you seen Boogie Nights?
I hadn't seen Boogie Nights before.
It might have been Boogie Nights. Because everything else, one of us brought, the other brought.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
There you have it. All right. So it's been almost a year. So I'm excited.
Me too. I'm very
excited for Love and Basketball. Should be a good time. Thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for especially listening to this a little bit longer episode than usual. Yeah.
Thanks everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Hey, get out there. Have a friend whose friendship is more valuable to you than your life. I just think that's
absolutely.
Everyone deserves that.
It's important.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.